Hi, I'm Phil, and today I thought we'd take a look at the three main Nosferatu movie adaptations that have been made and see how they compare. Now, there is one other from 2023, which is basically a remake of the original 1922 version, so I'm not really going to look at that. And there's a few other variations on this, but the three main ones are Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror from 1922, Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979, and the most recent Nosferatu from 2024. Make sure you've seen the films, spoilers ahead. Let's take a look at these one at a time and see how they compare and what they do well and what they perhaps don't do as well as the other adaptations. Now, if you're a hardcore fan of Nosferatu and Dracula films, you may know some of the stuff I'm going to bring up here. But the original Nosferatu from 1922, directed by F.W. Murnau, a German film, was originally an unauthorized adaptation of the Bram Stoker novel of Dracula. So the basic story is Dracula, but they were trying to skirt the copyright laws because Dracula, the novel, was still in copyright at the time. Now, because the film was not an authorized adaptation of Dracula, they in fact lost the lawsuit, and all copies of the film print were to be destroyed, which they were in Germany. But there were prints in other countries, so thank God, restorers have been able to stitch together the final film and eventually find the original subtitles and captions that came with the film and restore the film to its former glory. And it is now cited as being based on the novel. But it does change a few key things. In trying to circumvent the copyright, they changed many of the characters' names. So Count Dracula becomes Count Orlok and William Harker becomes Hutter. But there's a few other key plot beats that are changed. One of the key ones being that Count Orlok is not the aristocratic, handsome, sexualized being that Dracula often is portrayed.
I am Dracula.
Orlok is a monster, and he looks like it. And while there are some sexual overtones, even in this first version of the film, that is not how he influences people and women. The fact that the plague is intimately connected with Count Orlok's arrival and travels is only implied in the novel. Here, it's made very clear. But I think that's a very good addition. Again, leaning into the horror of the piece. And being made in 1922, the memory of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic was still very uppermost in people's minds. Millions of people died from this pandemic. The sense of plague was very topical at the time. The other key change from the original Dracula novel is how Orlok, in this case, is defeated. In Dracula, William Harker returns home, and with the help of Professor Van Helsing, they track down Dracula, the vampire, and drive a stake through his heart. So it becomes the men save the day. In Nosferatu, pointedly, the woman saves the day. Now, the woman in this case is Ellen, and the legend as presented in this first version of Nosferatu is, wherefrom there is no salvation, except that a woman without sin should cause the vampire to forget the first cock crow. Of her own free will, she should give him her blood. So it is the seduction of the woman that keeps him after the cock crows, that ultimately kills Nosferatu. And according to this new mythology, because Nosferatu was born of a demon, sunlight can kill him. And this was not in Dracula. Dracula doesn't like the sun, but it doesn't kill him. And there are other aspects to this myth that come forward in later Dracula and the two later Nosferatu movies, which we'll come to. Now, this film, of course, the 1922 Nosferatu, was a classic of German expressionist cinema. And it was, in fact, the first adaptation of the novel of Dracula. Now, there was an earlier Dracula adaptation in 1921 called Dracula Halala, or Dracula's Death, but that film does not survive. But apparently, according to Wikipedia anyway, it was not really an adaptation of the novel. It just happened to feature the character of Dracula. So I'm not counting that. Nosferatu, therefore, is the first adaptation of the novel into cinema, with the Bela Lugosi Dracula from Universal being made in 1931, almost 10 years later. This film, of course, being 1922, is a silent movie, but it features several iconic moments. Images that have sustained for over 100 years now and are still as compelling and thrilling as when the film was first made. And of course, Max Schreck's performance as Orlok has become iconic. So this film has gone down in cinema history as one of the greatest early horror films ever made, and one of the key films of the German Expressionist era of filmmaking. So it's surprising that it wasn't remade as a Nosferatu film until 1979. Werner Herzog, a German filmmaker, decided to do a remake or an update of Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, in my opinion, is the most important film ever made in Germany.
So he follows the original Nosferatu plot fairly closely. Despite that, Herzog reverts everyone's names back to the original Dracula novel. So Klaus Kinski isn't actually playing Count Orlok, he's playing Count Dracula. Ellen, from the original Nosferatu, becomes Lucy, and the friend is Mina. He actually flips the names of Lucy and Mina for some reason. And Hutter becomes John Harker. But despite following the names from the original Dracula novel, the story structure and the look of it is very much based on that F.W. Murnau Nosferatu film, including the diversions that it takes from the original Dracula novel, which of course is the fact that there's the plague, and in this case, in the Werner Herzog version, there are rats everywhere. 11,000 rats apparently were used in the making of this film. The fact that Klaus Kinski's Dracula looks pretty much the same as Max Schreck's Orlok. They're recreating that look, and I love Klaus Kinski in this role, and this is one of several films that Herzog and Klaus Kinski have made together.
I love the darkness and the shadows, where I can be alone with my thoughts.
And of course, they retain the climax, where in this case, Lucy willingly sacrifices herself to keep him away and with her until the cock crows and the sun rises. But it adds a few other little changes. One of the key ones is that when Harker, played by Bruno Ganz, returns home, finally, he has amnesia.
Who is this woman?
That's unusual. But having been a victim of Dracula when he was back at the castle, he's lucky to be alive.
It must be a very severe brain fever.
The other key thing that Werner Herzog does here, of course, is this is now a sound film with colour, shot in 35mm widescreen film. So he uses sound design very effectively. And of course, there is dialogue, so certain plot points are made clearer. But then there's stuff like this. What is he doing there? Where did that kid come from? The castle is meant to be empty. Now the kid's fine, he's awkwardly playing this violin piece. It's very weird and unusual. But why is he there? I thought the castle was empty. So that's an unusual addition. But many of the scenes in this version of Nosferatu are direct recreations from the original Murnau version of the film. He's actually replicating some of these classic iconic shots. And improving upon them, as in this case. Here it's very obvious that Lucy is encouraging Dracula to stay. She seduces him and keeps him there, which was not entirely obvious in the original silent version. And then of course there's the rats. They're everywhere. The silent version had them on the ship, but here they infest the entire city, and there's many shots where there are rats everywhere. The other thing that Werner Herzog brings to this story is that he is also a great documentarian, and this has a very cinema verite documentary feel to it. It's largely handheld camera. It feels real. and he holds on shots for a long time, relying on performance more than spectacle, and the intensity of Klaus Kinski in the role. Some people have argued that they find it all a bit dull because there is no score for long sections, and certain scenes just seem to hold longer than arguably they should. I think it works though. I think Klaus Kinski is perfectly cast in the role here as Count Orlok/Dracula. And Isabelle Adjani as Lucy Harker gives a very strong character performance. One scene that this film adds, which was not in the original, is where Lucy and Dracula confront each other, and they have this conversation.
Salvation comes from ourselves alone. And you may rest assured that even the unthinkable will not deter me.
This sets up the sacrifice that Lucy will make later in the film. It also gets around one of the early awkward plot points from the original Nosferatu film, which is, why does Hutter leave Lucy, or Ellen, alone in the house to go off and get this professor at her request? Why does he leave her alone in the house at night, knowing that they're in danger, knowing that Orlok might come and attack them? But he leaves. That's a plot convenience. In the Herzog version, Harker doesn't know who she is. Harker is stuck downstairs, and in fact has been trapped by her in that corner by crumbled Eucharist wafer.
And should a woman pure of heart make him forget the cry of the cock, the first light of day will destroy him.
Meanwhile, we do have a Van Helsing in the Herzog version, but he doesn't believe her. He does not save the day.
The causes will be gone into with scientific thoroughness, leaving aside superstition and prejudice.
It's up to Lucy.
I know now what I have to do.
So I think the way that's set up and the way that's played out in the Werner Herzog version of the story actually works very effectively. Lucy has no choice but to do this herself. Which brings us to the Robert Eggers directed version of Nosferatu from 2024. Like Herzog before him, Robert Eggers was a huge fan of Nosferatu and did a version of this back in high school.
When I was in high school, I had the idea of doing Nosferatu as a stage play that would be a silent film on stage with black and white makeup, black and white costumes, and super titles. And I thought maybe it was a silly idea, but my friend Ashley Kelly Tata said, no, that's a cool idea. So we directed it together, and it cemented the fact that I wanted to be a director when I grew up.
So this was a film he'd been wanting to make his entire career. This stars Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok.
How I look forward to retiring to your city of a modern mind.
Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter.
Yes, my lord.
And Lily Rose Depp as Ellen.
Come to me.
Again, this follows the basic structure as outlined by the novel Dracula and the original Nosferatu film, with the plague coming just a few years after we'd had another actual pandemic, COVID-19, and again featuring lots of rats.
My God.
Plague. It's a plague ship.
Although not as many as Werner Herzog, I gather. I think in this version they had about 5,000 rats. The key difference here, of course, is that the look of Count Orlok is very different. They're not trying to recreate the Max Schreck, Klaus Kinski look. Not just in the look, but also in the voice and the vocal performance.
What I attempted to do with him visually is make him look like a dead Transylvanian nobleman would actually have looked like, which, you know, is a different costume than we've ever seen and different hairstyle than we've ever seen for this character.
And Skarsgård chose to do this very deep, almost throat-singing voice for the character with this unusual accent. While the first film was indeed a horror film, There was only so far they could go with a silent film in the 1920s. The Werner Herzog version is also a horror film, but of a very different kind. It's much more grounded in reality. This version, the Eggers version, is much more fantastical. It digs into the horror much more. And the character of Ellen has a much deeper psychological connection with Orlok in this film.
I will not harm her!
But there is a fantastical, unreal sense to this version of the story. And yet, the motivations for the characters in this case are much more credible. Nicholas Holt's terror is very evident. One of the key things from the earlier films is that Hutter is trapped in the castle when Orlok, Dracula, leaves. So he makes a rope out of bed sheets and scrambles out the window. And then is injured in the process and has to recover before he can get back home. In this version, he literally jumps out the window because he's being chased by wolves and is seriously injured in the process. That makes a bit more sense. And also the fact that this Count Orlok goes straight for the heart, not for the jugular vein in the neck. The key twist that this film does is it plays both the Dracula ending, where we have a character like Van Helsing, played by Willem Dafoe, by the name of Professor Alban Eberhard von Franz.
Professor von Franz?
He's kind of the Van Helsing of this film, and he does the research. He realizes that Nosferatu is a vampire, and the only way to kill him, seemingly, is to do it while he sleeps.
We shall sanctify the earth wherein he is buried, and destroy the sarcophagus.
So they go off, as they do in Dracula, on a mission to do that. But he knows that that's not going to work.
I fear Nosferatu is impervious to any of our iron stakes. I'm convinced only you have the faculty to redeem us.
So here, he's using both the Dracula ending as a way to keep Harker away from Ellen, while Ellen does what's required by the Nosferatu ending. And they play the same beat that Klaus Kinski's Dracula did, with Ellen keeping him there, seducing him to stay. In this one, of course, Hutter tries to get back in time to save her, but fails. The other thing he does very effectively here is Renfield. Renfield, or Canuck, is a difficult character to justify. It comes from the original novel. He's a servant of the master.
He insists we offer him an agent in the flesh.
And he's the one that ends up in an insane asylum eating bugs. Or birds. But beyond this initial introduction of Hutter to his master, there is no reason to keep the character around.
And what was the Count's name?
Orlok.
Silence, dog!
This latest version of the story gives the character more reason for being there with scenes like this, but he still doesn't actually serve the story anymore. A key theme in this Eggers version of Nosferatu is destiny.
When tidings of your recent nuptials reached my ears, I knew it was Providence.
You are my affliction.
I care nothing of your afflictions.
Yet even now, we are fated.
This comes up several times in the course of the story, that this is fated to happen, and that helps make the ending more tragic but inevitable. One other thing this new version of the film does is it opens with Ellen. Not Orlok, not Hutter, but with Ellen, which establishes her as really the main protagonist. Now the Herzog version kind of did this too, but here we get a much better sense of the crisis that Ellen faces and how it must resolve by the end. It's not about Hutter or Harker trying to save the relationship and failing, because Hutter and Ellen is not actually the central relationship of the film. It's Ellen and Orlok.
Your passion is bound to me.
This version of Nosferatu, I think, makes it clearer that the central relationship of the story is between Ellen and Orlok. And that relationship needs to die. So that's my take on the 3 Nosferatu films so far. They start with Dracula, and they helped create a number of things that have become part of the mythology of Dracula Nosferatu, and giving, importantly, our central female character agency in this. She's the one who has to make the sacrifice at the end that will save the world. If you like these kinds of comparison analyses, check out my one on Frankensteins, which you can watch next. If you'd like to learn more about filmmaking, check out my book, linked in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.